Welcome to another episode of Infographic Instant with your host Brian Michael. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the question of whether governments anticipate changes in the economy. There's three views to such a question. Before we look at the views, let's figure out what the question actually means. Now, imagine that there's a large change in the economy, such as an oil boom, an internet boom, an earthquake which causes a significant economic shock. How does the government adjust to these changes in the economy? One way of thinking about it might be to say, well, if there's a big internet boom, then naturally the government should expand in order to provide goods and services for that new sector, regulation, and so forth. Another view might be to say, well, that's all part of the private sector, and the government should focus on the areas of public activity that it does best. In other words, we just don't know, and we also don't know how long that response takes, if there is a response at all. Again, taking our hypothetical example, imagine that there is an earthquake in Japan, and the Japanese government decides to create a new department and hire employees to deal with this emergency. In this case, it might take the Japanese government a year, it might take 2 years, or the Japanese government might actually respond in advance of the earthquake, anticipating the possibility of future earthquakes. Therefore, data can help us understand the extent to which governments change their size and structure in anticipation of these large-scale macroeconomic events. Now, in the infographic you see in front of you, we look at three possible scenarios. We look at the extent to which governments change their organizational structure strategically. In other words, do changes in size occur before significant changes in GDP growth? Second, do governments go with the flow? In other words, do government sizes and structures change contemporaneously or in the same year at the same time as changes in the economy? Or third, do government sizes and structures respond reactively to changes in the macroeconomy? In other words, does it take policymakers and senior administrators several years in order to allocate budgets, make plans, pass organizational regulations, creating different government departments, and so forth? Let's turn our attention now to the infograph in order to analyze this question. What you see in front of you is you see an error in expenditure change. And what that error looks at, it looks at the extent to which changes in government spending do not correlate with changes in GDP. So if, for example, government spending grows very quickly, whereas in the overall macroeconomy grows slowly, we would see a positive tracking error. If, on the other hand, the economy grew quickly and government grew slowly, we would see a negative error. Now, the lines you see in front of you look at this error for the three scenarios that we discussed previously. Namely, do governments respond strategically in advance, 1 year in advance? Do they respond contemporaneously within the same year? Or do they respond reactively with a 1 year lag? And so each of the lines you see in front of you assess that difference between growth of government size and growth of GDP. And what we see is that there's a difference between high-income countries and middle-income countries. High-income countries tend to adjust their government sizes in advance of changes to GDP, whereas in medium-income countries tend to respond roughly at the same time. And we found that the reactive model of government change doesn't appear to fit the data very well. However, as we will see in future infographics, there are a group of countries that do react reactively to changes in the macroeconomy. In order to see these kinds of trends, though, we need regression analysis and other statistical analysis which can control for the different factors that we do not see in the simple infographic you see in front of you. This has been Brian Michael with another Infographic Instant.